During the very decades that saw the fierce battles of the Taiping movement in China, an isolated corner of North America was seeing its own revolution. The story is well known up and down Alaska's Kobuk River Valley and throughout the surrounding territory. Back in the mid-1800s, that area was home to Manilik, the Eskimo prophet. His story has been passed down from generation to generation.
Once when Manilik was a boy, he was out there checking his snares. He saw a good place to rest, so he went over and sat on a piece of driftwood. And he heard a strange sound like
Tatagig, tatagig. That is the sound.
It means father and son, father and son. He came many times to the same place, and he heard the same sound again and again.
And another word, Isrumiksukti, the source of intelligence, the source of thought. Again and again he heard that. He said many strange things, so people thought maybe this was a crazy man. But he was wise, wiser than the fat cook, the shaman.
Sometimes he told about strange people who'll come from outside with white color. And he said they will bring books, and the people will understand these books, and they will know about God.
He talked about boats flying in the sky. People going underwater with no paddles. That's why they said he was crazy.
The shamans, I think they were afraid of him, or maybe jealous. He always broke their taboos. One time in Kotzebue, 2 of them wanted to do away with him. He told them, I could swallow up both of you, but of course he did not.
They tried to destroy his spirit while he was asleep, but the light in him was too bright. They could not get to him.
Another thing, he talked about the 7th day resting.
He put up a pole in front of his camp every 7th day. He said, this is the day I rest.
People said to him, why are you resting? You are just lazy, so you are not doing anything. He told them he lived by the commandments of the grandfather.
The grandfather, that means God.
Yeah.
Even today, more than a century after his death, the impact of Manilik's message and example remain. Robert Mulik, executive director of the Norvik Native Community, lives and works in the Kobuk River Valley, Manilik's home ground.
Manilik went over there and made some predictions that in the future what the Eskimo people are going to do is that they'll have capabilities of flying in the air in some kind of machine. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that we'd be just sitting there and flying in the air. The other one was that he sat on a boat and told him that, he said, someday what you'll do is you'll be sitting on this boat right here without putting any effort, but you'll be moving real fast.
Besides predicting the future, Manilik was concerned about the everyday life of his people. Fearing the dark power of the shamans, these Eskimos lived under the various taboos that had become embedded in their culture. Manilik saw that this made life unnecessarily difficult for them. He set out to weaken the shamans' influence by teaching the people that they could safely ignore the taboos. And he didn't just talk. He set the example by publicly breaking the taboos himself.
One of them was particularly that certain kind of berries you couldn't eat in the summer. He went over there and told him, he said, why are you afraid to eat berries? You should eat berries. And so he went over there and ate some berries and told him, nothing happened to me, nothing will happen to me. And everybody watched him for a long time and said, oh, when is he going to croak? But he didn't.
Over and over again, he proved that there was a power greater than the shamans. When he confronted them, they knew that they were facing a superior force. Yet he was quick to say that his wisdom and protection came from above, from the one he called the grandfather. It was the grandfather who gave him power over the shamans. It was the grandfather who showed him what was to come. It was the grandfather who told him how to teach his people to live without fear. And it was the grandfather who taught him about 7th day resting. Manilik's story is just one of many where people have learned about God and his Sabbath without ever reading a Bible or seeing a missionary. Another one comes to us from a remote corner of the South American rainforest. About 100 years ago, a village chief named Auqua had an amazing dream, a dream that changed his life. The visitor told Auqua many things. He told him about God. He told him how to be healthy, how to be clean, what to eat. He taught him songs and prophecies. And of course, he told him about the Sabbath. The visitor, whom Auqua called the Shining One, also told him that he should watch for a teacher who would come to his village carrying a black book. In the little village of Parima, in western Guyana, we found Auqua's descendants. They still remember the dream and Auqua's shining visitor.
It looked like God. They believed that God was speaking to him because in his dream somebody was talking to him. They believed that was God. He told them about the Sabbath, that Sabbath is a sacred day. No work should be on Sabbath days. No work, no kind of activity, just worship. Auqua said, "Don't go fishing, don't go to farm. Let us stay and worship God together on the Sabbath day."
In those days, they used to tie knots on a string every week or every month. And every day they would lose one for the first day, second day, on to seventh day. So they knew which day was the Sabbath.
Sort of a primitive weekly calendar. But it was dependable. It was still working several years later, when a lone missionary made his way to Auqua's village. He was carrying a Bible, the black book, just like Auqua's dream. What he found was extraordinary. Rather than the typical primitive people of the jungle, the villagers were clean and healthy, and they were faithfully observing every Saturday as the Sabbath, a custom their descendants continue to this day. You might be surprised to learn that the seventh-day Sabbath has especially deep roots in the continent of Africa. Scores of independent churches have sprung up among the people of Africa since the arrival of Protestant missionaries back in the 18th century. With African founders and leaders, these indigenous groups share a common background. Sidney Davis, a researcher and lecturer on African Christianity, explains.
The African Independent Church movement is an expression of secession from Western imperialism, the imposition of Western culture upon the African. And so it's appealing to them because they were able to express Christianity from within their own experience instead of within an imposed culture.
This widespread Sabbath observance should not be surprising. The Sabbath concept is expressed through various African languages and traditions. And I'm not talking only about the ancient Christian culture of Ethiopia that we highlighted in part 4 of our series.
The KwaZulu-Natal tribe worshipped a god whose origin could not be traced. And they worshiped this god on a special day. And on this day, no manual labor was performed. People could not harvest their crops. People were not allowed to do any kind of cultivation. The day was solely devoted to the worship of this god. This day of worship was Saturday. The concept or the tradition of the seventh-day Sabbath has always been pervasively ingrained in the Ashanti culture. One needs to know that in almost every African culture, religion or the concept of God is ingrained, is intertwined in it. So the question, how far back is the Sabbath tradition, quite frankly, for an African or an Ashanti, is really a question that shouldn't be asked, because as far as they know, it has always been part of life as they know it. Saturday in the Zulu language means the day of completion or the last day. And what I find very fascinating is that they had these concepts of the Sabbath long before the arrival of the European missionaries. The missionaries were the ones who brought Sunday worship. I mean, and up until that time, everyone knew God had only one day of worship, and it is Saturday. When the European missionaries came, they sought to introduce not only a different way of worship, but a different day of worship, which is Sunday. And because they brought Sunday worship, every white man automatically got the name Sunday white man, Kwesi Brony, because Kwesi is a name given to a male child on Sunday, and every European is Sunday born because they brought Sunday worship.
In America, the tradition of Sunday as a holy day has characterized religious life for centuries. On one hand, its proper observance has been seen as a requirement for God's blessings. On the other hand, some people felt that to ignore the holy day was to invite disaster.
A decade or so before the Civil War began, a northern physician who was an abolitionist and who decided to take a tour of the South to see the conditions for himself and was inclined to see them with quite a jaundiced eye, found himself in New Orleans one Sunday. And he was shocked with the Sabbath desecration that he observed, the gambling, the prostituting, the general revelry of the day. And the next day, a terrible destructive fire broke out, as was quite common in the 19th century, and the city was laid to waste. And he wrote in his diary that he thought it was a just deserts for it breaking the Sabbath.
Times changed, and so did attitudes towards Sunday. As industry became more highly mechanized and labor laws limited the work week, folks began to taste the luxury of free time. Sunday itself became associated more and more with leisure, and that meant trouble.
The problem was that the dollar mark was being put on Sunday through leisure and recreation. That is to say that professional baseball, theaters, amusement parks, all of these activities that constituted leisure and recreation were profitable, and many entrepreneurs were making profit from it, and therefore they were profiting from the Sabbath.
In the eyes of many religious leaders, the secularization of Sunday was a giant step in the wrong direction. There were strong and influential voices calling for more laws to limit commercial and even private activity on Sunday. Those efforts to protect Sunday continue even today, supported, for example, by the Lord's Day Alliance.
And the Lord's Day Alliance takes this position because it believes that the idea of a Sabbath day or a day of rest really antedates any of our religious communities, even that of Judaism itself.
Back when the Lord's Day Alliance was formed, the issue of Sunday laws was really a hot topic. In May of 1888, Senator Henry Blair of New Hampshire proposed legislation to limit secular activities on Sundays within the jurisdiction of the United States federal government. Senator Blair made it clear that the aim of his bill was to preserve the first day of the week as a day of rest and religious observance. The bill was referred to the Senate Committee on Education and Labor, where Blair was chairman. Among those who raised objections to the proposed legislation was Alonzo T. Jones.
Sir, you may speak of the power of the majority in social and civil matters, but there is no majority, however large, that can invade the territory of a man's religion. Not in this land, not under our Constitution.
Mr. Jones, you fail to recognize the right, or more importantly, the responsibility of the state to protect the welfare of the people as a whole.
Senator, it seems that you fail to recognize the clear distinction between man's responsibility to the state and his duty toward God. The first, he must render under the force of law. The second, duty to God, must be carried out only under the force of love, and that freely, voluntarily. No law can command love.
But the law of the state must protect the people to carry out their duty to God. Our Sunday law is written to ensure the preservation of the Lord's Day for the benefit of the people.
An admirable goal, Senator Blair, but completely unnecessary. Our Constitution already recognizes the rights of the people with respect to their religion. Your Sunday law would add nothing to our fundamental freedoms. It would rather add restrictions.
I'm afraid, sir, that you are blind to the realities of our age. If men owe a duty to God and do not willingly perform it, they become a corrupting influence in society.
This proposed Sunday law would have a corrupting influence by introducing force and coercion into its observance.
On the contrary, the intended effect is to enhance the Sabbath. If men do not consent to honor the Lord's day, if their actions on that day are unrestrained by civil law, excuse me, then they trample on the very rights of those who would honor and observe the day as holy unto the Lord.
With all due respect, Senator, can you not see that your Sunday bill proposes to trample on the rights of the religious minorities? Do you really want to revert to those dark ages where church and state united to force men to violate their conscience and conform to an officially established religion?
Now, that is an unworthy comparison, sir. Our Sunday law is for the ultimate benefit of the whole society. Is it not a legitimate function of the state to legislate on behalf of the common good?
The common good of which you value so highly is not served by restricting the rights of one man's conscience in order to enlarge the rights of another. It is best served by the freedoms upon which this republic was established. State-sponsored religious coercion defies the clear intent of the Founding Fathers.
But this law provides an exemption for those who wish to worship on another day. Jews, Seventh-day Baptists, you're Seventh-day Adventists, for example, who observe Saturday as the Sabbath. So where's the problem?
The problem is...
Why, just this morning, Mrs. Batum of the Women's Christian Temperance Union addressed this committee in support of such an exemption. She has conferred with representatives of 9 different groups who observe Saturday rather than Sunday, and you know how many of those approved the exemption? All of them. Every single one.
Senator, I have great respect for the temperance principles promoted by Mrs. Batum's organization, but she does not speak for my denomination on the question of exemptions.
Come now, Professor Jones, are you about to object to exemptions that would certainly benefit your group and several others?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, we do object. An exemption clause would not change the proposed law so as to modify our opposition. Here is the principle, Senator. If the law were just and perfect, an exemption would not be necessary. Another thing, an exemption clause is nothing other than a toleration clause in disguise. Toleration is not liberty. It is merely a form of condescension, the majority putting up with the opinions and convictions of the minority. Our Constitution guarantees not tolerance, but rights, and we claim those rights as American citizens.
Mr. Jones, without yielding the point, let me move to another question. How would you react if we were to rewrite this bill as a Saturday law, with Saturday as the Sabbath, not Sunday at all? I suppose you would take a very different position.
To the contrary, Senator. All laws that attempt to force the conscience are manifestly unchristian and unconstitutional by their very nature. Therefore, Senator, we are against every Sunday law that has ever been made since the first one enacted by Constantine to the one you are proposing now. And if you changed it from a Sunday law to a Saturday law, we would oppose it just as firmly.
Senator Blair's bill never made it out of committee. But there were already plenty of other Sunday laws, which are commonly called blue laws. In fact, in America today, 49 of the 50 states have laws protecting Sunday. Alaska is the only exception. But just because these laws exist doesn't necessarily mean the issue is settled.
State Sunday laws have been challenged under a number of provisions of the Constitution, both the federal and the state constitutions, including due process of law, equal protection, violation of the separation of church and state, and violation of the free exercise of religion. by and large, they've been upheld by the state courts as constitutional.
Back in 1961, the U.S. Supreme Court heard 4 different cases that challenged the constitutionality of Sunday laws. Religious liberty advocates were hoping for judicial recognition that Sunday laws are unconstitutional based on their religious content.
In a case called McGowan versus Maryland, one of those 4 cases, the court decided that although the laws were obviously originally religious, they talk about the Lord's Day, they talk about the Sabbath, they talk about a whole pervasive lineup of religious terms and religious rationales. By 1961, the court had found that the rationale had evolved to be laws that protect workers' rights. And of course, when you ask the question, can states pass laws that protect workers' rights, the answer is, of course, yes.
With so many blue laws on the books in the United States, it's fair to ask why we hear so little news about their enforcement. Are local authorities arresting folks? Are judges handing out sentences? Are the public coffers being enriched by the fines levied on the guilty parties?
I think there are 3 primary reasons why we don't hear a lot about the enforcement of Sunday laws. First of all, the laws that are on the books are often not enforced because law enforcement simply has other priorities. Secondly, there isn't a great will and interest among the general populace in this issue currently. And I think thirdly, the laws that are enforced are often more or less invisible to the public. For example, behind me is Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. bans working on construction on Sunday mornings. Most people don't notice that because they're not in the construction trade, and even if it does occur to them, it's not a very significant impingement on their daily lives.
In our secular and materialistic age, there are not many voices calling out in favor of religiously based Sunday laws. Besides, the record seems to show that legislation is not a good partner to religion. Even the Lord's Day Alliance, a solidly pro-Sunday organization, agrees with that.
The history of the Lord's Day Alliance has been one in the past of maintaining or trying to maintain blue laws in the United States. We've come to the place today where we feel that is a retrogressive kind of approach. Legislation may help, but our end really is to promote a cultural understanding of the psychological and sociological importance of this day, which for us clearly has Christian theological and wider religious underpinnings.